The end of the era of colonialism did not usher in the age of peace. Instead, at times it laid bare the simmering conflicts between formerly oppressed communities caused by territorial, ethnic or religious disputes, which eventually led to full-scale wars. For some nations, independence from colonial rule was just the beginning of new battles, as borders drawn by departing empires often failed to account for the realities on the ground. This left newly formed states grappling with unresolved tensions and struggles for sovereignty. One of the examples is the wars between India and Pakistan over the region of Jammu and Kashmir. In this video, we're going to cover the First Kashmir War of 1947–48. Do you know why people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? 2 new exclusive videos weekly and other perks, including early access to all videos, voting rights on the next videos and series, access to our private Discord and our schedule, and much more. More than 200 exclusive videos are available to our patrons and YouTube members, including the series on the Spanish War of Succession, Punic Wars, Pacific War, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. Join them via the links in the description or pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Most importantly, their kind support allows us to create 3 free videos per week without worrying and pay our team members competitive salaries. Thanks for supporting us. Even though Britain emerged victorious from World War II, the empire on which the sun never sets was so devastated economically and so inundated by independence movements that it was forced to decide to stop being an empire. Against the background of anti-colonialism, the post-war British government concluded that it was more economically prudent to gradually give independence to its colonies than to retain control over them. India, which had a very powerful anti-colonial movement, was among the first British colonies to be promised independence. Initially, Britain wanted to see a unified India, a single Commonwealth member state, which included all territories of the British Raj. However, a massive Muslim minority of the British Raj had other ideas. Led by the Muslim League, they demanded their own state in Muslim-majority regions of India. In 1946, particularly following the Direct Action Day demonstrations conducted by the Muslim League, India saw a great degree of intercommunal violence. Eventually, Britain and Hindu leaders reluctantly agreed to the partition of India along religious lines. The partition was accompanied by a lot of suffering, violence, and displacement of people. While most of the former British Raj territories were divided between India and Pakistan, several large princely states remained unaffiliated for a while. Their fate was going to be decided later, which paved the way for even more uncertainty and conflict. Jammu and Kashmir was one of these states. Now, we're not going to dive into the details of partition, ideas, and political discussions behind this painful process, since our main focus here is the military aspect of the First Indo-Pakistani War over Kashmir. If you are interested in the political aspects of the partition and this war, you can check out the video by our other channel, The Cold War, on this subject. But what is Jammu and Kashmir? Why are India and Pakistan still fighting for this region? Throughout recorded history, this region has been ruled by Hindu and Muslim dynasties, before falling to the Sikh Empire in the early 19th century. But their rule lasted only 2 decades, as the British Empire took over Jammu and Kashmir in 1846. This region is mostly mountainous, geographically divided into 4 main parts: the northern areas, Ladakh, the Kashmir Valley, and the Jammu region. The geographical barriers have played a crucial role in maintaining the local ethnic, cultural, and linguistic differences in Jammu and Kashmir, since communication between different parts of Jammu and Kashmir in such tough terrain has always been challenging. At the time of the partition in 1947, the infrastructure of this princely state was fairly primitive. The all-weather roads were connected to Pakistan. The railroad into Jammu and Kashmir was also going through the region of Waziristan, which became part of the Muslim state after the partition. There were only 2 roads connecting Jammu and Kashmir to India, but they were fit for use only in good weather. Hence, most of the commodities came to Jammu and Kashmir from Pakistan. Moreover, 77% of the population of the state were Muslims. But the ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, was a Hindu. Along with that, the most influential Muslim politician in Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah, was against the partition of India and was not a proponent of joining Pakistan at all. To make everything even more complicated, Kashmir was a strategically located region on the intersection of India, Pakistan, the Soviet Union, and China. In that sense, the Himalayas are a gateway to both India and Pakistan, hence control over this region would give an important defensive advantage. In theory, the Independence of India Act allowed princely states to join India or Pakistan or stay independent. The Maharaja preferred to stay independent, but in the absence of this option, Plan B was to join India. Over the summer of 1947, tensions in Jammu and Kashmir between the Muslim majority and the Hindu government turned into violence. Muslims started to accuse the state government and Hindu militant groups of violence against them. They started to organize in Poonch. In response, the Maharaja government demanded all Muslims in this area to surrender their weapons, and some indeed complied. But then the rumors of these weapons being given to Hindu and Sikh militant groups only exacerbated the tensions. On the 24th of August 1947, Muslims started a rebellion in Poonch. Simultaneously, rumors of violence and pogroms against Muslims spread in Pakistan. In September, the Pakistani government started withholding supplies to Kashmir in an attempt to exert pressure on the Maharaja government. There are different versions of what happened next. Pakistan claims that in response to the violence and discrimination of Muslims, Pathan tribes mobilized at their own volition to fight for their fellow Muslims against the Hindu oppressors. Some accept that they may have had ulterior motives, like looting, but by no means was the Pakistani government behind this mobilization. However, India claims that this was planned in advance by the Pakistani government under the codename Operation Gulmarg. The alleged plan was to mobilize and send the Pathan tribal forces into Jammu and Kashmir, launch a rebellion in the northern areas to occupy Ladakh, launch another rebellion in border regions, capture the capital Srinagar and the roads leading to India. This would be followed by the deployment of the Pakistani army under the pretense of restoring order. The alleged goal was to execute this plan as soon as possible, before India had any chance to react. But what exactly did these nascent armies look like? The Independence of India Act ruled that 2/3 of the 460,000 pre-partition army would be part of the Indian army, while Pakistan would get the rest. India got most of the weapons, ammunition, military infrastructure, and crucially, most of the air force. Overall, India had 88 infantry battalions, 12 armoured regiments, and 19 artillery regiments. Pakistan got only 33 infantry battalions, 6 armoured regiments, and 9 artillery regiments. The fact that the British Indian Army mostly consisted of Hindus and Sikhs also had a negative impact on the quality of the Pakistani army, since it lacked experienced commanders and, in general, had a shortage of officers. In the Kashmir War, Pakistan also had several thousand Pathan tribal militias and local Muslim rebels fighting against the state forces and later the Indian Army. A very curious fact is that the commander-in-chiefs of both armies were British officers, and this had an impact on the outcome of the 1947-48 Kashmir War. By September 1947, the Pathan tribal militia started making regular incursions into the border areas. Along with that, thousands of demobilized Muslim World War II veterans were forming militias and causing trouble for the Maharaja's army. Muslim soldiers of the Maharaja army were defecting to fight for the other side. By October, the state army was significantly overstretched, despite some personnel and supply aid from fellow Hindu states. The situation was ripe for a general and decisive offensive. On October 22nd, 2 groups of Pathan militia invaded Jammu and Kashmir from 2 directions. The first was the Abbottabad Gahi Habibullah Muzaffarabad, with the capital Srinagar being the key goal. Again, it is difficult to ascertain the exact strength of this grouping, but several sources report about 5,000 people involved in this offensive. The second grouping to the south was an auxiliary force that was going to move into Kohala and advance on Poonch and surrounding areas. On October 23rd, the northern grouping occupied Domal, defeating the 4th Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Narayan Singh. The defection of the Muslim forces from this unit aided them. The Pathans continued their advance on the capital, Srinagar, and they were only stopped in Uri by some 200 soldiers stationed in Srinagar under the command of Brigadier Rajinder Singh, who destroyed the bridge over the Uri River and conducted a fighting withdrawal to Baramulla. The southern militia grouping quickly seized Bag, Rawalkot, Rajouri and Berry Pathan, encircled Poonch and cut the road to Jammu by early November. The Azad Kashmir government was proclaimed in the Muslim-controlled areas of Jammu and Kashmir. The northern grouping was expected to continue their advance, despite the destruction of the bridge in Uri, but the lack of discipline of these irregular forces was a major problem. Apparently, the Pathans could have crossed the small river without too much trouble, but they refused to give up their vehicles, which carried their loot. As a result, they captured Baramulla on the doorstep of Srinagar only on October 26th. Still, even then they preferred plundering and massacring the local Sikh and Hindu population instead of moving to the capital Srinagar. The only obstacle on the way to Srinagar was a roadblock defended by 50 soldiers of the state. Now, the significance of Srinagar went beyond the symbolism of control over the capital. The Srinagar airfield was a strategic military asset in this war, since it was the only viable way for India to bring in personnel and equipment, at least until the weather permitted. Failure to move on Srinagar at once gave the Maharaja government time to act. On October 24th, they asked for military assistance from India. They agreed to join India in exchange, and 2 days later signed the Instrument of Accession. Bringing troops and equipment via the roads would take too much time. Thus, India decided to immediately airlift 2 companies of the 1st Sikh Regiment via 30 Dakota transport aircraft to the Srinagar airfield. At once, they were sent to the east of Baramulla to join the state forces in an attempt to stop the Azad Kashmir militia. Once again, they were outnumbered by the militia and had to make a fighting withdrawal towards Srinagar, creating defensive positions on an elevation 20 kilometers to the east of the city. The Indian Air Force started conducting sorties to hinder the militia. Moreover, the tribal forces were more used to guerrilla warfare and had no training or expertise in fighting against dug-in infantry. By the time they managed to bypass the defensive positions, India had managed to fly in the remaining companies of the 1st Sikh, along with 3 battalions of the 161st Infantry Brigade, a machine gun company, and an artillery battery. Aware of the deployment of the Indian army to Kashmir, the Pakistani leader Muhammad Ali Jinnah ordered the British acting commander-in-chief General Gracie to send the Pakistani army to Jammu and Kashmir, but the latter refused this order. The British did not want the situation to escalate further, and strangely, the Pakistani leadership did not bypass the British commander to make this crucial decision. As a result, by the time the Pathans managed to bypass the main Indian roadblock and defeat the Indian unit in Badgam, just a few kilometers away from Srinagar airfield, India had managed to deploy a sufficient number of troops to stabilize the situation. The Pathans had now reached Chalateng to the north of Srinagar and prepared to assault the capital. The Indians defended with the 1st Sikh and 1st Kumaon regiments, along with a company of the 4th Kumaon regiment, while the 7th Light Cavalry was sent to the rear of the Pathans. On November 7th, the Battle of Chalateng started, with the Pathans attacking the Indian positions. They managed to hold back the attackers, while the 1st Kumaon regiment approached their right flank and the 7th Light Cavalry did the same from the rear. As a result, the Pathan militia was encircled, while the Indian Spitfires rained fire upon them. The Pathans had no chance in this situation and lost 600 to 700 men. The first major battle of this war resulted in a decisive Indian victory, as the threat to Srinagar was eliminated. The Indians capitalized on their victory and pressed on. On November 8th, they took Baramulla. 5 days later, Uri was recaptured. Pakistani sources report the extreme demoralization of tribal forces due to the lack of government support. And perhaps had the Indian army, now possessing air superiority, decided to go all the way to Muzaffarabad, they could have landed a decisive blow on Pakistan's designs on Kashmir. Instead, they focused on breaking the siege of Poonch. Elements of the 161st Brigade moved from Uri towards Poonch. In contrast, the 50th Parachute Brigade, supported by several armoured vehicles of the 7th Light Cavalry Regiment, moved from Jammu to defeat the Pakistani forces in Mirpur. The first grouping fought its way to Poonch and reinforced the defence of the city, but ultimately they failed to raise the siege. For almost a year of this siege, the Indians managed to bring in supplies through the air, thanks to their complete air domination. The second grouping entered Kotli on November 26th, but when the news of the capture of Mirpur by the Pathans reached the 50th Parachute Brigade, they decided to withdraw. Meanwhile, in the northern areas, the Gilgit Scouts unit, led by the British officers, rebelled against the Maharaja's decision to join India, captured the capital of the province, and proclaimed the Gilgit Islamic Republic in early November, which a couple of weeks later joined Pakistan. The intensity of combat decreased somewhat in the cold months. Most of the fighting in December 1947 and January 1948 took place in the Nowshera Janga sector. Generally speaking, the Pathan tribal forces and the Azad militia were much more used to fighting in the winter, while the Indian army was quite unprepared for the cold. Initially, their clothing and footwear were unsuitable for the winter. Many Indian soldiers were seeing snow for the first time in their lives. But ultimately, Pakistan was unable to take advantage of winter. The tribal forces captured Janga in December and advanced on Nowshera to capture this city and cut the Indian supply line to Poonch, but failed to do so. This allowed the Indian army to launch Operation Vijay in the south. The 50th Parachute, the 19th Infantry and the 20th Infantry Brigades, supported by armoured squadrons, recaptured Janga in March 1948 and Rajouri in April. This finally forced the Pakistani government to officially send in the regular army into Kashmir and Jammu. The 7th Division was the first unit deployed to support the Pathans and the Azad militia. But by this point, the Indian Army had already seized the strategic momentum that they would carry until the end of the war. In the northern areas, the situation was better for the Muslim forces. In February 1948, the Gilgit Scouts of the Muslim companies of the 6th Brigade launched Operation Hammer, with the goal of capturing Skardu, then Kargil, then the Zoji Pass, and finally Leh. Initially, the Indian forces defending Skardu were weak, so the Gilgit Scouts advanced and besieged Skardu, Kargil and Dras. In May, they defeated 2 Indian battalions sent to relieve the Skardu garrison. But the ability of the Indian Air Force to deliver supplies enabled it to fight until August, when they were forced to surrender. In May, they also captured Kargil, while in June, Dras fell to the Gilgit Scouts. Leh was the next goal, but the arrival of a Gurkha battalion made it possible for the Indians to repulse the Pakistani attack. At this point, the Indian army launched a counterattack, as the Gilgit Scouts took positions at the entrance of the Zoji Pass. This was an extremely favourable area for defensive operations, with no vegetation to conceal troop movement, while the steep mountains made it impossible to conduct armoured manoeuvres. Hence, the first Indian counterattack, known as Operation Duck, failed in September. Major General Timaya of the Indian Army devised a sophisticated plan to solve the Zoji Pass problem. He ordered an armoured squadron of the 7th Light Cavalry to Srinagar. All movement was carried out at night. Hence, Pakistani intelligence was unaware of this development, and when Indian tanks attacked the Zoji Pass on November 1st, the Gilgit Scouts were caught absolutely unprepared. They had no anti-tank weapons, nor were prepared to face tanks in any other way. Soon, the Indian Army captured Dras and Kargil. After that, the line of contact stabilized throughout the battlefield. By the winter of 1948, the global demands for a ceasefire were getting stronger. Fighting in such tough mountainous terrain and a punishing climate was taking a toll on both sides. India and the Jammu and Kashmir State Army had lost some 3,000 men, while Pakistan's casualties had been estimated at around 6,000. On the 5th of January 1949, India and Pakistan agreed to a ceasefire. Pakistan was going to withdraw its forces, while India was allowed to keep a very small contingent to maintain order in the state. The fate of Jammu and Kashmir was going to be resolved in a referendum, which has not happened to this day. The First Kashmir War has not solved this conflict between India and Pakistan. The former captured 2/3 of the princely state, while Pakistan took control of some western districts, along with the northern areas. Both sides lost a chance for a decisive victory by taking the wrong steps or lacking discipline at crucial moments. But overall, the Indian advantage in army experience and firepower, and most importantly the air superiority enjoyed by the Indian Army, allowed them to recover from the initial setback in this war. Our series on the Indo-Pakistani Wars will continue in the coming months. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member-exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.